Okay, welcome back to BCIS 1305. My name is Dr. Schuessler, and today we're going to talk about Chapter 4, Programs and Apps. So let's go ahead and jump on into the chapter and see what we've got in store for us. So today we're going to talk about the identity, or we're going to identify the general categories of programs and apps. So when we talk about programs and apps, we're going to talk about what a program actually is and what is it about a program that makes it a program. We'll talk about an operating system and how it interacts with applications and hardware and its role that it plays with respect to us as users. We'll differentiate among the ways you can acquire programs and apps, whether or not you go to the store, you download those programs, things like that. We'll talk about some of the key features of productivity applications. We'll talk about some of the key features of graphics and multimedia applications. We'll identify the uses of personal interest applications. We'll talk about the purpose of software used in communications, identify the key features of security tools, and lastly, identify the key features of file and disk management tools. So let's start out with what is a program. A program consists of a series of related instructions organized for a common purpose. In other words, it's kind of like a recipe. If you're interested in cooking, it's a lot like a recipe. It's a series of instructions with a very specific sequence of things that you need to do in order to be able to complete a meal, for example. A program is no different. It has a very specific set of instructions that have to be completed in a certain order in order to be able to accomplish some sort of a task. An application is a category of various types of programs or software that is really designed to help users out in some way, shape, or form. It's something that we want to accomplish. It's something that helps us to be more productive. It's something that helps us to do what we want to do. So for example, there are various games out there. There are applications. We have Office productivity tools that are applications. This is different than, say, an operating system, which is different. An operating system is a piece of software that allows us to interact with the hardware. It allows us to interact with various applications that we have. So it allows us to start applications, close those applications down, install drivers and applications and new pieces of hardware and things like that. So the operating system is the interface that we interact with to be able to open and use applications. Okay, so I know this is kind of small, so let's go ahead and see if we can't zoom in here just a little bit. So let's take a look at some of those different categories and what they might look like. So some of the productivity tools that we'll take a look at, in terms of applications, include things like word processing, presentation, spreadsheets, databases, etc. There's lots and lots and lots of productivity tools that are out there. There's also graphics and media applications that are out there. Some of these are probably pretty obvious, others maybe not quite so much. There's personal interest applications that are out there, lifestyle, medical, entertainment, etc. Communications, again, this is another one that people are probably more familiar with, things like Skype and whatnot. Security, something that we probably don't pay enough attention to. Firewalls, antivirus programs, malware, and internet filters. I would also actually throw backup and restore up there as a security application as well. And that brings up a good point. Just because an application is listed in one particular group doesn't necessarily mean that it's only in that group. It can sometimes apply to other groups as well. This last one here, file and disk management, this is probably something that students struggle with quite a bit. We need to do a better job of managing our files. We don't want to just throw everything onto the desktop. We want to have a very clear structure to our files so that we can find those files when we need to, so that we can back them up when we need to. It makes it very hard to move from an old system to a new system when we have files all over the computer. We don't really know what to back up. So we need to really do a much better job of file management. My recommendation for students is to each semester have a folder, and then inside that folder have another folder for each class, and then inside of those folders you can kind of keep track of various pieces of homework. You can keep track of projects that you have going on with group projects and things like that. So We need to do a better job of that, and I would highly recommend that you kind of practice that. Okay, so how does an operating system and an application interact and work together to be able to accomplish some sort of a task? This is really a pretty generic example, but in this example, an individual needs to open up and print a document. So he interacts or interfaces with the operating system. In this case, it looks probably like Windows 8. He interacts with that to open up Word and then open up the document, and then ends up clicking the print button on within Microsoft Word. Now, Microsoft Word doesn't directly print that file to the printer. If that's the way it worked, essentially every program would have to understand and know how to print a document directly to the printer. It would have to know every printer that is out there. That's not how it works. What actually happens is the application doesn't worry about what kind of printer is installed on the on the physical hardware. Rather, it just knows that the operating system is able to do that. So it sends that print job not to the printer, but rather back to the computer, and the computer itself then interfaces with the printer. The computer itself interfaces directly with the printer to print out that print job. So that's kind of it at a real high level of that interaction between the user, the operating system, and the application to be able to produce a piece of output. So where do we get all these pieces of software? Where do they come from? What different forms do they come in? Well, we can buy them off the shelf in a retail environment. We can go to Best Buy, we can go to Hastings, we can go to some of those other places. The reality is, though, we don't do that very often anymore. That used to be pretty much how you went about getting software, but that's really a pretty old model. We can custom develop our software. And there's pros and cons to that. If we're a large organization and we have some very specific, very unique needs, perhaps we want to go through that process. But the reality is most of us are going to buy software. We may customize that software to a degree, but we're going to buy off-the-shelf software and tweak it to our specific needs. So the advantage of custom software is we get something very specific and really addresses our unique needs. The downside is that makes us responsible for updates. That means that as other applications get updated, that may break, it may make something incompatible with our custom piece of software. So updates become our responsibility. If a specific individual within our organization did the development of that custom software, when they leave, that creates a real problem for us. Who are we going to bring in to now do future updates? So there's pros and cons to custom software, but just be aware that I would avoid it whenever you can. Kind of all lumped together, we have web apps, and mobile web apps. And as they pretty much kind of imply, they're very mobile, they're add-ons, things like that. We have open source software, which some people will equate to free software. It's not quite that, but certainly there's a lot of open source software out there. A lot of Linux-based software, OpenOffice for office productivity, Linux for operating systems, GIMP for graphics programs. There's a lot of open source software that's out there. Related are shareware and freeware, which are things that can be run for free. In some cases, they run for free completely. In other cases, they run for free, but they'd really like you to make a donation. And then there's public domain software. So there's a lot of different forms of software that are out there. One of the biggest general categories of software is the category of productivity tools or productivity applications. And these are apps that are designed to assist you in becoming more efficient and effective at something that you're doing, whether it's at work or it's at school. Doesn't really matter. It's just designed to help you kind of organize things and make you more efficient. So we have word processing, which basically allowed us to move beyond typewriters and create much more elaborate documents, much more easily, much more colorfully, share them much more easily. So it really gave us a lot more functionality. We have presentation software such as Microsoft PowerPoint, Google Presenter, things like that. We have spreadsheets, we have databases, note-taking. There's lots and lots and lots of different types of productivity applications. Now, in class, I mentioned that I really disliked their use of the word project here in this slide, because it, especially for those that are familiar with project management, it kind of draws you into that mode of thinking. But if you look at this a little bit more holistically or from a broader perspective, think about all those different productivity apps that we just got through looking at. With every single one of those, you can think of about something that you're working on as a project. So what do you do with a project? Well, you can create it, you can edit it once it's created, or you can edit one that somebody else has created. You can format it, change the colors, the fonts, the content of a particular project. You can save it to your local hard disk, save it out on the cloud somewhere, and you can distribute that project. You can share it with other people. You can email it to people. You can save it to shared drives, things like that. So that's kind of a general model of what we do with productivity applications. So let's look at one specific application that is a productivity app. Word processing software allows users to create and manipulate documents. So we can type in text. Again, we're replacing the traditional typewriter. One of the real nice things about word processing software is we can use clip art. We can pull in images. We can use much different fonts than we could use on a typewriter. So that's kind of the idea behind word processing. It really allows us to produce some very professional looking documents. We also have presentation software. Again, in our class we use Microsoft PowerPoint, but there's a lot of other presentation softwares that are out there. For example, there's Google Presenter. For example, there's OpenOffice has its own presentation software. Apple has their own. So there's lots of various presentation softwares that are out there. I like to use Prezi. It's an online presentation tool. But there's lots of different presentation softwares that are out there, and allows you to create visual aids for presentations. In some cases, you can create kiosk presentations that automatically run and share various slides with users and things like that. Great for slideshows and all that kind of stuff. We've got spreadsheets. Now, spreadsheets are a particularly important productivity application, because they're extremely functional. They're something that really kind of accountants put on the map, because they do something very well that accountants really need. They allow you to really kind of organize data. They allow you to apply formulas that are going to be repeated over and over again, and so you can end up with some very consistent results. You can end up with results that are easy to update. So let's zoom in here real quick just to kind of talk about this for just a second. So let's say, for example, that we have a series of numbers right here for January. So we got rent, food, tuition, books, etc. We've got all these numbers right in here. Well, we can manually add these up, and if we do, we should end up with this number right here at the bottom. We can do that each time and add all those up, or rather than doing that, we can actually type in a formula here that automatically adds these cells up right here. Now, the advantage to doing that is twofold. One, we can copy that formula all the way across here, so that because this one adds up these cells right here, when we copy it, that formula right here, it adds up the cells right above it as well. And so we can copy that formula all the way across, and it does the same thing for each column. So it's a way to quickly have a formula apply to multiple things really quickly. Another huge advantage to spreadsheets is, let's say, for example, we overestimated our tuition costs, and our tuition costs were actually $1,200. We got a break this semester. Well, when we change that to $1,200, that change is automatically reflected because we used a formula rather than actually typing that number in. Because we used a formula, when we put in $1,200 for tuition, that total is automatically adjusted to reflect that change. So that's another real advantage to the use of spreadsheets. Something else I want to kind of draw your attention to, we'll get into it later on in the semester, but I wanted to, something that students often struggle with is this concept of the difference between a column versus a cell. So when we talk about columns, think of the Roman columns. They go up and down. So We have column A here, which goes up and down. We have column B, which goes up and down. We have column C, which goes up and down. Then we have rows, and rows go from left to right. So we have row 2 here, we have row 3 here, we have row 4 here. Where the column and the row intersects is referred to as a cell. So in this example right here, this total here is cell B17. So if we come down to row 17 and we go over to column B, we're in cell B17. That's a cell. So that's kind of a spreadsheet in a nutshell there. A database is a lot like a spreadsheet on steroids. A relational database specifically is a collection of different tables, different related tables. Basically, a database is a collection of data that's organized in some sort of fashion to allow us to access data, to retrieve data, to update data, and use that data in some way, shape, or form. Everything is pretty much a database. If you think about Google, for example, when you type in a query, it goes back and pulls all that information from a database, from Google databases that they have, and that's what they're providing you, is that information. Databases are on the back end of just about everything that we deal with. So databases are an extremely important application. There's also note-taking software, especially with the popularity of tablets rising the way it is. Makes it very easy to sketch out notes, much like you would on a sheet of paper. It's not something I've really gotten into all that much, but there's certainly those options that are coming out there. They're getting better and better in terms of being able to interpret that writing and actually turn it into text. But it really gives you some additional functionality by being able to do that. We've also got calendar and contact management software. I use this a lot with Microsoft Microsoft Outlook. You can also do it in Google, on Google Calendars that they have illustrated there on the screen. You can share those calendars. It allows you to keep track of various appointments. And it can be done very easily if somebody sends out an appointment request in the email. Instead of just being text, it can actually be an appointment request. And that allows you to easily click on accept, deny, or tentatively agree to the meeting. And so it'll easily allows you to pop that into your calendar, and that way you can keep track of the various meetings that you've got, when they are, and all that kind of stuff. Now in some cases, rather than just buying an individual piece of software, we can actually purchase a software suite. And that's a collection of individual programs that are all bundled together. One of the best examples of that is probably Microsoft Office. It comes bundled with, depending on the version that you get, usually at the very minimum, Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. In some cases, it'll include Access and OneNote and things like that. But it's a suite of software. It's a collection of different software applications together. Usually the advantage to that is you can get that at a reduced price. It's cheaper than buying those individual applications one at a time. There's also another type of productivity application called project management software. And you've got several different choices when it comes to project management software. Probably the most well-known is Microsoft Project. And it's great software for being able to work on a project. You can record the various tasks that need to be completed. You can assign those tasks to individuals. You can have dates for when those tasks are to be completed. You can have information about the cost to complete a task, the amount of time that it's going to take to complete a task, the order of task completion. In other words, some tasks have to be completed before another task can be started. So it really allows you to manage projects. And if you're interested in that kind of stuff, there's a lot of money for project managers. They really make a very good living. So this is a piece of software that helps them to do their job better. I mentioned that there's other ones out there. There's one that's plugs into Google called Ganter, which is free. It's not as full-featured as Microsoft Project, but it is free, and it allows you to keep track of projects. I would highly recommend doing something like that for your classes when you have group projects. We've also got accounting software. This is really designed more for medium to small businesses, and medium-sized to small businesses. Allows you to keep track of your various reports that you might need, financial transactions, all that kind of stuff. And I say small to medium-sized businesses. We'll get back to that here in just a little bit. As far as on an individual level, personal finance software, here's an example of Intuit's Quicken. And I've used this as a great way for individuals to keep track of their finances. It can track various accounts. It can provide you feedback about your budgets and things like that. Having said all that, there's actually a free version. This is actually an application that you install on your computer. There's a cloud-based version called Mint, mint.com, that's by Intuit, that's free. And I would definitely, as students, I think that's something that you should definitely take advantage of. Use it. It's free. It allows you to keep track of where your money's going. You might be surprised on where you're spending money. I think students sometimes it's new to them, so I definitely would recommend that you use some sort of personal finance software. Mint has been a nice find, so try that out. It's free. There's also legal software out there. I don't know that as students you are necessarily going to be all that interested in it, but it allows you to quickly and easily enter into create legal documents that you might need without having to necessarily go out and hire an attorney, which can be expensive. So you can create wills, bill of sales if you're selling a vehicle, all kinds of different things. Also got tax prep software. This is probably a little bit less common today because of the various opportunities to file taxes online, but there are certainly applications like TurboTax that are out there that allow you to create your fill out your tax records and file them electronically at home. There's also document management software. This is something I do a little bit of. End up with a lot of paper documents, things like that. They end up all over my desk, and it's not something that, if it's something that I need to shred, I'll shred it. If it's something that I need to be able to keep for later, I don't want to have to file it physically. So what I end up doing is I end up scanning it into a document management software. And this allows me to scan it. I can save it as various file types. I usually save it as a PDF. This allows me to search it, so I can search for different pieces of text. And this allows me to keep a lot of information in my computer, so I don't have to have lots and lots of file cabinets. There's a lot of other types of productivity applications that are out there. Some of these are much more leisurely. There's reference applications, travel applications, retail applications. So you might have something like some of the different travel sites that have applications that allow you to book flights and all that kind of stuff. We have certain applications that will allow you to find the nearest restaurant and do reviews and things like that. We have reference applications as well. So there's a lot of other types of productivity applications that are really designed just to make our life a little bit easier, a little bit more enjoyable. Now, I mentioned earlier about the accounting software for small and medium-sized businesses. If we're a very large business, we tend to have much more demanding needs. So we may have very specialized classifications of software. We have human resources software, for example, that help us to manage employees when they clock in, when they clock out, their salaries, all those types of things, everything that's associated with human resource management. We may have specialized accounting software that handles accounts payable, accounts receivable, and interacts with our other applications. We may have engineering or product development software, manufacturing software, marketing software, customer relationship marketing software, for example. So there's lots of very specialized pieces of software when we start talking about large organizations. If you end up being a CIS major or sticking around taking some of these other CIS courses, you'll end up in the MIS class, and you'll deal with talking about a lot of these a lot more, and how an organization really needs different components to be able to function efficiently and effectively. And then there's also graphics and media software that are out there, computer-aided software design, for example, desktop publishing software, Microsoft Publisher, for example, Paint, another imaging software. Think Photoshop and all that kind of stuff when you see some of this stuff. Photo editing, something I mentioned in class. You can remove red eye. You can crop out an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend. Gives you a lot of ability to customize images. So when you see an image, be a little wary about what you see, because what you see may not be what was actually taken. There's clip art and image galleries, lots of images all over the web. In fact, you can use Google to go out and search for images and pull those images into your document. In fact, you can even customize using one of the advanced searches and find images that are legal for you to use for your own purposes. And then there's video and audio editing software. Allows you to create your own videos, have nice fancy beginnings and ends, and have text overlays and all that kind of stuff. Some of these are very easy to use. Some of them are much more complex to use. In any of these cases, when we talk about video editing, when we talk about Photoshop and all those types of things, they're very specialized applications, and if you get really good at them, you can tend to demand a pretty good salary. Multimedia authoring software allows users to combine text, graphics, audio, video. A lot of these, there's a lot of overlap between some of these. There's also website authoring software. An HTML page is really just a text file, so you actually really only need a text editor, Microsoft WordPad, or Microsoft WordPad or Notepad. Either one you can create HTML documents with. And that's on the very simple end. On the very complex end, you might have something like Expression Web or something like that. Allows you to create HTML pages. And there's a lot of things in between. And these allow you to create very robust, very nice websites. Again, same kind of thing. On the simple end, you do it kind of as a hobby. Once you get really good at using something like Expression Web, you can start to demand some pretty good salaries. Media players, everybody has their favorite. I've mentioned in class, I'm not a huge Apple fan, but there's other types of media players out there. There's online players, for example. We talked about some of those in class. Pandora, for example. The text also talks about disk burning software, something that's not as important as it once was. With broadband, can really download just about everything that we want. So there's not a huge need for disk burning software anymore, but some people do still do it. You can write files to disks, a variety of different types of files to disk, and use them for long-term storage and things like that. We also have personal interest applications, and there's several different subcategories of personal interest applications, including lifestyle applications. Maybe you're interested in genealogy, for example. Medical applications, if you've got a weird lump somewhere and you want to find out more about it, there's applications out there that help you do that. Entertainment apps, convenience apps, education apps. There's an app for that. Have you heard that commercial? Lots of communication applications. In class, we talked about the distinction between synchronous and asynchronous communications. Whenever you hear synchronous, it starts with an S, so think same. There's something same about it. So when we talk about synchronous communications, we're talking about same communications or same time communications. So there's several examples of synchronous communications here: voice over IP, chat rooms, instant messaging. These are conversations that occur in real time. We have a conversation that goes back and forth, and we're able to communicate in real time. That's not any more or less valuable than asynchronous communication. They're both very valuable, and they both have their own place. A discussion forum is a great example of asynchronous communication. We may have a question today that we find answered in a discussion forum from 10 years ago. So just because our question is today doesn't mean that it hasn't been answered in the distant past. So discussion forums, blogs, things like that allow us to be able to take advantage of asynchronous communications as well. Text kind of shifts over to talking about security tools there. The next chapter, I think either the next chapter or the following chapter, goes into more detail, but we kind of touch on some of the basic security tools here. I mentioned backups being a security tool earlier, and it could fit into security, it could fit into the file management. really kind of fits in both, but it probably is the most important security tool that you have, because things are going to get through the firewall periodically. Your hard disk is going to fail periodically. Bad things happen, so the only way to be able to recover from that is if you have a backup. If you don't have a backup, it really doesn't matter how good your firewall is. If your hard disk fails, your files are gone. So unfortunately, as important as backups are, that tends to be one of the things that we're incredibly bad about, is making those backups in the first place. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in just a minute when we get there. So a personal firewall is a security tool that detects and protects a personal computer and its data from unauthorized intrusions. So when we start talking about security, a lot of times it gets related to a medieval castle. So one of the first things we think of when we think of a medieval castle is big, thick walls. And that's kind of what a firewall is. We put up these big, thick walls to keep the bad guys out. But we don't stop there. We think of defense in depth, this concept of defense in depth. You may have heard of this term before. And it's the idea that we don't want to have just a single security mechanism. We want to have multiple security mechanisms. So in addition to big, thick walls, we may have a drawbridge. We may have a moat. We may have archers. So we've got lots of different types of security mechanisms protecting that castle. So in addition to that firewall, we also want something like antivirus. Antivirus is a program that helps protect us against various types of viruses. Now, in this section of the book, it doesn't really talk about this per se, but when we talk about viruses, we're really talking about a type of malware. Malware is a very general term for bad software. Bad software in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a virus, it's a worm, it's adware, it's spyware. Those are all different forms of malware. A virus is a very specific type of malware. A virus is something that needs to interact with people in order to be able to do whatever it's designed to do, whether it's, flash things on the screen, delete files, whatever. It requires some sort of user interaction. That's what differentiates a virus from, say, a worm, which we'll talk about more in the next chapter. Another type of malware is spyware and adware, and these have some similarities, but they're not exactly the same. Spyware is a program that's really designed to collect information about you from you secretly. So the example I discussed in class was, imagine logging into your bank, and you know a little bit about security. You look up in the corner of your screen and you see that the little lock icon is on your browser. You see that HTTPS is in your browser, so you know it's a secured connection. You know that it's an encrypted connection between your computer and your bank, so you feel safe. Unfortunately, if you have spyware on your system, though, if, for example, that spyware is a keylogger, you don't type in your password in encrypted form. You type in your password as your password. A keylogger is going to capture that information and send that information out to the bad guys. So spyware is a real problem. It's something we really have to be cognizant of. Adware is one of those things, you start seeing ads pop up. You see banners and pop-up windows and stuff like that. Honestly, by the time you start seeing pop-ups on your system, you've been infected for a while at that point already. So when you see lots of spam messages, lots of pop-ups, it's time to start cleaning your system. And we'll talk about more of that in the next chapter. It touches on it briefly here, but we'll talk about it more in chapter 5, I believe. Spyware removers and adware removers are usually the same program. It's one program that takes care of both of these. There's lots of different ones out there. Just because you have one that pops up on your screen and says your computer's infected, download me to clean it, don't trust that. You need to kind of have a pretty good feel for what some of these programs are off the top of your head, so you don't get taken in. In a lot of cases, what will happen is they end up infecting your computer by downloading that program design that they tell you is designed to help you. One of the big ones I like is Spybot Search and Destroy. It does a very good job of removing spyware and adware, and it's free. Other security tools: internet filters, anti-spam programs, web filters, phishing filters, pop-up blockers. There's lots and lots of different security tools, and it really just depends on how elaborate you want to be. There's internet filters that help block certain sites. There's anti-spam programs. which are designed to stop spam before it ever gets to you. There's web filters to try to prevent you from going to certain websites. Phishing filters, certain websites that try to collect information about you. There's filters for that. There's pop-up blockers. So there's lots of tools out there designed to help keep you from getting to those bad places. Now the chapter finishes up talking about file and disk management tools. And like I said, this is a real issue with students. Students really struggle with this, and they're not the only ones. I do the same thing. The example I talked about in class is, what do you do when you download a file and you need to remember where it is? Well, you throw it on the desktop because everybody can find the desktop. And eventually you end up with two 17-inch monitors with icons all over both of them. And you can't find anything anyway. So it's a problem. We need to do a better job of managing our files. We've got something like this here. We've got Windows Explorer. It allows you to see various files. You can create your organizational structure or your file structure here in Internet Explorer. My personal favorite is to download Google Drive, the application for Google Drive. That allows you to have a local copy of those files. You can create that structure, and it's automatically synced up to the cloud into Google Drive. The advantage of this is twofold. Number one, you have more structure. You can access those files from anywhere. At the same time, you've got an instant backup of those files too. So it's a really good approach. I really like that approach. If you are throwing your files all over the place, and part of the reason you want to kind of have a better structure to those files is when it comes to things like backup, that you're able to back things up. If you buy a new computer and you have files literally all over that computer, on the C drive and on the desktop and in other folders and things like that, when you go to copy those files over to your new computer, you're going to miss some. So a good folder structure will help prevent stuff like that from happening. If you don't have a good search structure or folder structure, you need to be able to effectively search, and so be able to search for various files. It doesn't really show it in this photo, but in Windows Explorer there's usually a search bar up here to the top right, and that allows you to search for specific files like star.docx, for example. That way you can search for your document files. So get good at search. It pays off not only in search engines, but also on your computer as well. There's image viewers. I don't really know why the text threw this in here, but those are certainly out there. There's also uninstaller tools, which is something I definitely recommend. It doesn't happen as much today, but there used to be a tendency to, when you wanted to get rid of a program, you just delete the folder that program was in and consider it done. The reality is when you go to install a program on a Windows system in particular, not only is there a folder created for that particular program, but it also tends to make changes in various files throughout your computer system. And those various changes, when you delete that program, those changes don't roll back in those other files. So you need to go through the actual uninstall process rather than deleting them manually. And you can find the uninstaller program in the control panel. A lot of programs have an uninstall program that comes with them. I prefer to just use the one that's built into Windows. That way it's the same process each and every time. You've got disk cleanup tools as well. What's going to happen is your temp folder is going to get full, your recycle bin is going to get full. Periodically you want to go through here and clean up your various drives, and it helps it run better, especially as the drive starts to fill up. Your temp folder, as it gets bigger and bigger, will slow things down. So use that disk cleanup tool periodically to clean up some of those old files. You've also got disk defragmenters. This is not as big a deal as it once was. Essentially, when a file is written to a hard drive, it doesn't have to all be written in the same place. So for example, you may have a Word document where part of the file is at the very beginning of the disk, and part of it's at the middle of the disk, and part of the file is at the very end of the disk. And that tends to slow things down. When you go to open that file, for example, now the head on the hard drive has to move to different parts of the hard drive to be able to find the different pieces of that file, put it back together so that it can be opened. That's fragmentation. Well, we want to be able to defragment that and put that file back together. It will help the hard disk to perform better. Now, I mentioned that's not really a problem anymore. Most modern operating systems kind of manage this process for us and try not to allow fragmentation to occur. So it's not as big a deal as it once used to be. Other file and disk management tools: screensavers, file compression, PC maintenance. Screensavers are good in terms of being able to protect information on your screen, especially if at work. You may have sensitive information on the screen. A screensaver pops up, and especially if it locks the computer, it allows you to help protect whatever's on that screen. It also helps to reduce the power consumption. We've got file compression tools. As far as using file compression on your local system, I tend to avoid it if at all possible. It slows things down. It takes time to compress and decompress files. So I don't like to compress things on my local hard drive if I can avoid it. Hard drives are relatively cheap. Get a bigger hard drive. Now, when we're talking about files that are going to be downloaded or uploaded a lot on the internet, now compression starts to make sense, because if we can save some bandwidth, especially if it's going to be uploaded or downloaded a lot, now all of a sudden we can save us some space in terms of our bandwidth. There's also lots of PC maintenance tools out there. Those are programs that are designed to identify fixes, identify problems and fixes, maybe fixing issues with the registry, hard disk issues, things like that. So I tend to be a little weary of programs, PC maintenance tool programs. There are some good ones out there, but other than your basic stuff such as Adaware, or not Adaware, but Spyware Search and Destroy, really some of your basic stuff that comes with the operating system, or a few of those add-ons, I would really try to avoid those whenever you can. Now, as I mentioned, the most important security tool and file and disk management tool is backing up. You need to have a backup. There's online storage solutions. Certainly there's programs that you can install on your computer to do backups, but we tend to be really bad about this as users. So back your stuff up. Avoid a lot of these issues. The advantage to using something like Google Drive is, again, if that stuff is out on the cloud, they do a much better job. This is kind of their job. Google is really good at backing up their data, and while you may lose connectivity to the internet and not have access to your files, once that connectivity is restored, your files are still going to be there. So I'm a big proponent of cloud-based storage. So this chapter we talked about programs and apps available for computers and mobile devices. We talked about the role of the operating system and really being an interface for us as users to work with the hardware and to work with software applications. We talked about some of the features of various types of applications. We talked about communication applications, being able to communicate synchronously and asynchronously. And then we just got through talking about security tools and disk and file management tools. So that is chapter 4 in a nutshell. Programs and apps. The next chapter, I think, we talk about security, chapter 5. And that should be a fun chapter. So check back with me then. Take care.